a lot of the standard, if you're going to Europe or if you're going to like North America, they're going to want certain approved vaccinations.
Right.
And if you're coming from a country in Latin America, or like other Southeast Asian countries, or, countries that don't have really access to like the creme de la creme of the vaccine, then that's going to be a problem. Welcome, everyone. This is Cindy.
Hi, this is Anna.
Welcome
Hi, this
to
is Cathy.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
Welcome to episode 11 of Close Encounter series. I am super excited today because joining us today, we have two sort of, I would say, cultural advocates. Like, I think they're like the pioneers and the advocates. Like they're like warriors, I think, in the performing arts industry, and their advocacies, and they fight for the voices of the arts and culture. We have Cathy Barbash joining us all the way from New York, and Joe Sidek all the way from Malaysia. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves first, and then we will, jump into what we're going to be chatting and talking about today. So I'll start off with where my screen is. So go ahead, Cathy.
Yes, Cathy Barbash. I'm born and raised in New York. My background was first comparative government, but I realized that I loved music more. So I got another degree in playing the viola, but then realized that my talent was really administrative, managerial, not performing. So I ended up as an orchestra manager, and very honored and blessed to be able to work with the Philadelphia Orchestra for a number of years. This orchestra, one of the biggest and best in the States, pre-COVID had a very robust touring schedule, and the first American orchestra to go to China. And then I brought them back 20 years after that first historic visit. And the particular challenge of doing the tour, I realized, because of my government background, was because the system was beginning to change. That was 1993. So I thought this was a great opportunity to do a very, very early China pivot, as it were, and focus on cultural exchange projects and cultural policy reform and cultural industry infrastructure development at that very, very early stage. And that's what I have been doing with a variety of collaborators, both in China and the States and other internationally, for almost 30 years now, maybe more. And then the last 5 years, since one socialist country is never enough, I added Cuba. If I had not been so otherwise preoccupied with music and rowing and other activities, I would have done my senior thesis on Cuban foreign policy between 1960 and 67, when they were a non-aligned communist nation flirting between Russia and China. I just did not see myself my life in the microfilm reading room. So, but now I get to live out my interest. And so it's fascinating to see where Cuba is now is similar in some ways to where China was 30 years ago. But because the cultures themselves, the anthropological, the societal cultures are so different, Asian versus Hispanic / African / also a Chinese influence there. It's been very enlightening. It's been a fascinating journey.
Awesome. Joe?
Hi. So where do I start? I'm 63. I'm from Malaysia. For those who don't know or have never heard of Malaysia, we are in between Singapore and Thailand. That slip of land between Singapore and Thailand. I read town and country planning, but I've always been in love with the arts. And 10 years ago, I started doing festivals. So basically now I run festivals in Malaysia. I also sit on the national panel for creative economy as an industry advisor. And Cindy's very kind and very gracious to say I'm an advocate. I really just enjoy working and doing what I like. That's all I have to say. I'm painfully shy too.
You have a lot to offer, Joe, both you and Cathy. And I think you guys come from this interest, but I think it's the interest that spearheads your, that passion that spearheads what you want to do. And you come from government, but also, Joe, you come from a region where you're also, in a way, what art is also tied to the government, and that's a very different perspective than maybe some of the European countries or what North America looks like, and how those models shape out within our business. But I'm going to let Yana take off some of her questions, her burning questions for today, and what we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to start with one question which picks up a term I've heard a lot within the last, 16, 18 months, which is the new normal. I mean, it was out there before, but it just got a new frame and a new content during this whole pandemic. So my question is, what would you both consider to be the new normal, referring, or when it comes to the performing arts scene?
And there's no right or wrong answer,
Oh, no.
It's just been, that word has been so used, right? Like globally, and this is why we wanted to talk about, because it's been from every single industry, everyone, the news, the tagline is the new normal. What is the new normal? And then, and for us, it's, what do you think? What do you envision? What does that mean? Have we really thought about it? Because
or maybe even on, just to add this question, maybe it's not even the term we or you would use, the new normal.
Yeah.
I actually think the new normal is that there is no more things such as normal.
Yeah.
Normality has disappeared.
Yeah, I agree.
Because there's no stability in there are no assumptions we can make anymore, because there can't even be any more normal, because the ground is not steady under our feet. So we don't know whether people will come back to any kind of performance, what performances that they will come back to. Number one, can they afford to come back to performances? Number two, do they feel comfortable, safe coming back to performances? Number three, given the trauma, the world trauma we're experiencing, what do they want to experience? Do they want to experience it passively? Do they want escapist, something to take them out of themselves? Do they want something that's going to engage them, that they have to react to? We don't know what that is, and also no new normal, because we don't know how to, we don't really know how to plan. The conventional, shall I say, arts organizations in the United States, some are going back into venues, but some have to go back into venues that are, that are widely spaced and reduced capacity. Others that have the ability to perform distanced just by nature of what they are, a summer festival, etc., are less impacted. Others are learning to do activities outside where it is safer. And so there is more, I wouldn't call it normal, but there is, maybe the new normal is, there is the realization that they have to be more open to trying almost anything. That might be the closest thing to a new normal. The new normal, knowing that there is no normal.
The definition of normal would be, in that term, a little bit of what we know, or what we have known, or what we refer to. And the new normal is like a white blank page. It's like we have to start from scratch in a way.
That the new normal is knowing that there is no normal. The new normal is knowing that there is nothing stable, and that anything could change at any moment. The Heraclitus, you're not dipping your toe into the same river twice, because so Broadway started to reopen. Mm-hmm. And one of the big blockbusters that draw, so the worry is, will the tourists come back? And then one of the biggest blockbusters for, not New Yorkers who go to see this, but for out-of-towners, Aladdin opened, and they just had to reclose because of breakthrough infection. So they're now closed again for at least 2 weeks. Oof. So how can you say that, commercial theater is normal anymore? So.
Yeah, but I think it's like you said, I mean, it refers to everything. It refers to like a normal schedule. It refers to the people, like the people on stage, off stage, the audience, like everyone. Everything is kind of, well, it's new.
Also, United States is probably unique in, because the tension between federal and state, where, there is not a real national public health system. So there can't be a national mandate. And so you have this crazy, insane patchwork of different laws and mandates in not only in 50 different states, but in the different municipalities within those states. So New York City can say, you need to be vaccinated if you want to either attend or work on Broadway, or go to any museum or any venue at all, or even so. Within the next month, I have both a wedding and a funeral to attend, and they're both in, one is in the Prospect Park Boathouse, part of one of the city official parks. Another is in the New York Racquet and Tennis Club, and in both cases, I have to upload my Excelsior pass that proves that I have been vaccinated twice. So, in that, for New York City, that's the new normal. If I want to engage in the civic or cultural life of the city at all. If you go to Miami, if you go to Florida or Texas, the normality is going to be very, very different. But it's just like the new normal, just like, we're getting far afield of culture. But, if a young friend of mine wants an abortion, can't do it in Texas, they have to go to Oklahoma or New York or what have you. So there is no, the United States, even though we've had a change of administration, because of the decentralization and the radicalization of the community, there is no new normal here. Anyway, the new normal is abnormal.
And what about you, Joe? What does it look like in Malaysia as Malaysia, as people there also try to move into the new normal? I mean, what does that mean to you and the country?
We've had a really difficult time because sometime middle of this year we had the worst figures anywhere, and so borders were closed, but then they quickly took charge and things look as if it's on the mend now. You can't go into a restaurant unless you're doubly vaccinated. You can't eat in certain places. You can't cross borders. That's why I wonder, Cathy, how do you have state rules and regulations and people are allowed to cross borders? Here we can't. We need special permits to cross borders.
So in the United States, there are rules in terms of getting into the country or not, or leaving the country. So for example, very early on in the pandemic, the U.S. closed its borders, and Canada, our neighbor to the north, closed its borders. And it's only as of last August 9th that Americans can travel to Canada. And it's still, unless there were compelling family reasons or you were an essential worker, it's still not possible.
But state borders in America, how does it work, Cindy?
Well,
you mentioned that all the state.
Yes. So, for example, last November, if I've been living in New York, but I wanted to go down to Pennsylvania to pick up an order I had made. But if I had done that, I would have had to quarantine when I got back to New York. Just because of, going across
even state borders.
Yes, even state borders, but each state will have its own regulations. So whereas for New York State, I had to quarantine for 2 weeks if I were going to do that. And that was, sort of rates in Pennsylvania were higher than they were in New York. So I ended up not to take any chances. This is before the vaccine. But probably in Texas, there were no quarantines that you could, Texas, they have other beliefs. And so.
but just going back to the new normal word, right? I think it's so difficult to determine what the goalpost is because it keeps changing even in anywhere around the world. They open borders and then they had to close. They open theaters and then they had to close, So it will be a changing landscape for maybe another 2 years. But I'm the pathological optimist. I'm like one of those that think that it's going to be better. We lived through the plague and we lived through the Spanish flu. We will get better. And like early this year, March, April, Australia recorded bumper figures for Adelaide Fest. and Adelaide Fringe, and look at Japan. I mean, I know there were no audiences, but they managed to pull through an Olympics right in the middle of it all, So for me, I live on that positive hope that we have to change. We have to take precautions, and we Asians are better at it because we follow the rules. We follow rules really well. We don't fight, and I've never seen a public spat in Malaysia about somebody not refusing to wear a mask.
Well,
it's almost like a police state. You have to wear a mask. If you go into a restaurant and they check you and you've not checked in, we have to check in everywhere we go. Every space that you go in, there's an app that you check in and you check out, so that they can contact trace you if you've been in a space that somebody was contaminated, So in that respect, we're quite good, and we toe the line, and it's also a safety thing that that they're going to get in touch with you if you were in a cab or in a driver that has reported a passenger, So that's one good thing about Asians towing the line, Yeah.
So different here in Europe. Oh God.
Yeah.
So I've got a question for
Sorry?
Presenters and agents in terms of this quote unquote new normal. How are you planning for any type of international? I mean, here we see that China is going to close for another year, and Europe coming and going. You don't know, from one week to the next what's going to happen. Have you just decided, okay, for the next 2 years, I'm not going to try to book anything?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult because it's a risk that, it's a risk that you take as a producer.
Yeah.
Because what happens if you book somebody and you've paid your deposits and the doors close, So I think all the producers in Malaysia, even with local shows, are terrified. We're now allowed up to 50 to 70% audience. So it is getting better. But I think all producers are afraid of international shows. And the government is giving huge incentives for you to do local. It's local. So if you spend money on any local productions, and I must say the Malaysian government has been brilliant. They've been giving out sustainable loans, grants, and now they're giving out grants for people to work on new work, So the last 3 years, 2 years, 1.5 years, they've given out a lot of money to the arts, which I was quite shocked. For a country that never put arts in the top 5, they have really given money to the arts industry.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I specifically move artists across international borders. That's really what I do. And I just got one of my artists into Taiwan, and that was not without going through a few hoops. It was he is Taiwanese, but don't hold a Taiwan passport, only a US passport. And Taiwan is also, all the Asian countries are super, super strict. So Taiwan right now, same thing. You can't even enter with a foreign passport.
Right.
And we had to go through special visas that he applied, which we didn't know whether that was going to go through or not until the very last minute, because the government had stopped the processing due to COVID, and there was a delay on it. And he literally didn't get the green light of it until like 2 weeks before he was supposed to fly. And even during that whole time, he had his flight reserved, and then that got canceled and had to be rebooked, which was a delayed by 4 days. But then he had to be in quarantine for 21 days in Taiwan, and he's still in the middle of quarantine because his performance with the orchestra is not until the end of October.
Okay, so that brings up a really interesting question, is how you've altered, again, talking about this new normal, about how you've altered the economics. How has the financial equation changed? Who is bearing what of all this huge extra expense that did not exist before? How, do you have a sliding scale, and how that hardship is shared between you, the artist, and the
presenter? Yeah, absolutely, and it's a shared cost. Yeah,
it has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, like from my side, the shift has not been done yet. We're still in the process. It's still processing. There is a shift, and everyone is, I mean, it adds everything Cindy just said, or what you just said, Cathy, it adds up to the budget. I mean, that's one of the main things that's happening, like the budget goes from here to there. Also, what I like in Europe, as long as you can stay in Europe, people are focusing much more on the possibility when you go from A to B that you can get back to A without using a plane.
Yeah.
And being able to cross the border within, let's say, 12 hours. Because if there is like any kind of, you know, regarding, you have to be back home in time. So that's another thing, like it's the budget, and it's also the touring scheduling. Like you don't go too far from where you can go safely back to. So America, for example, I booked my first flight in 2 years for January. Everyone knows I was sitting in a bar and I booked the flight, and everyone I booked a flight because I was so happy. But they start, and that's the ban for Europeans will go down in November. But honestly, who knows if I can go back the way I plan to. I hope so. But I booked a flight, like a ticket, which is easy to rebook.
Right.
It's not the cheapest ticket I could get. So the budget, and here we are still in a process. We are processing, like what you said, Cathy, like the question is who's covering those costs, the extra?
Yeah.
Right.
We don't know. I mean, everyone does it differently right now, but there is not a common sense of rule. I think it's still something that establishes itself, because in Germany, for example, is trying to get in artists from the outside, at least for next year. They are trying. There's not
but
like...
This year is still very hard because I got a free all expense thing to Kazakhstan and Hong Kong in October. I had to turn down because you had 2 weeks quarantine there, and then you come back. It's almost a month of your time, and not many people can afford to switch off a month, you know, from not being where you are.
If you have some, I just had a question yesterday, like for a light operator, not a light designer, because they're so desperate of operators. Everyone, like right now in Europe, everyone is working like crazy. So the prices, like their daily rates, just went through the roof. I was like, I couldn't find anyone, and by the time I found someone, he said, "Oh, this is my my price per day." And I was like, "Oh, that's a lot." And he was like, "Okay, try to find someone else." And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right.
Well, but that, I mean, for quote unquote essential for services that are demand, whether it is a lighting designer or a contractor who's going to do your home renovation, or even you know, new refrigerator, that supply chain, whether it's for labor or for products, that has definitely been affected. We're seeing that across the board here in the States.
Yeah.
But another question in terms of the international travel and having the appetite, or deciding to take the risk to do this. What is the situation with vaccines that are honored or not honored? Because I'm advising this wonderful Cuban modern dance company that I would highly recommend everyone book. It's called Malpaso Dance Company. They're independent. And they have been able to get the Abdala, the homegrown Cuban vaccine. And Cuba, has a very good health system. But this vaccine is not accepted everywhere. For example, they have a tour coming up booked in the United States, but so far all the venues are saying that they would not accept Abdala. It has to be one of the American exams. So they're in the process of figuring out, do they somehow get across the border to either Mexico or Canada and have someone that they can get kind of swoop in with 20 doses of Johnson & Johnson, which is just one shot, so they can, and then sit there for 2 weeks while the shot takes effect before they can start a US tour. So I'm wondering what you all are seeing.
So same thing, like for me, for me, it's I tell everyone, all the artists, like, and in terms of planning, it's basically nothing is happening. I mean, this case of October, like with my artist in Taiwan, is a rare case that really happened because everything kind of lined up, because he also has, his parents are there and we got him in. And of course it all worked out that, that the orchestra was willing to share 50% of the quarantine hotel. And so there was a lot of these things where we worked with the artist and it's, everyone has to give. But this is a very special case. I mean, The other one is, we've got, I mean, I've been rescheduling this. Like, finally, I have Joshua Bell coming to Saudi in January. And that's been like a year and a half in the making, almost 2 years, because of COVID. And of course, with Saudi, it's like, you have to be vaccinated. It has to be also a certain approved, like, Moderna, Pfizer.
Right.
I think the China vaccine is actually not accepted. So like, that's going to be a problem too, because every country has different vaccinations, and a lot of the standard, if you're going to Europe or you're going to like North America, they're going to want certain approved vaccinations.
Right.
If you're coming from a country in Latin America, or like other Southeast Asian countries, or, countries that don't have really access to like the creme de la creme of the vaccine, then that's going to be a problem. And this is starting to present haves and the have-nots.
So, do you foresee the agent industry, the aspect of the performing arts industry that are the agents, the people who do the booking, the artist agents? Do you foresee any sort of joint side business side initiative created that it's solely devoted to sourcing, not really marketing, but sourcing and selling access to the internationally, gold standard accepted vaccines? Is that, do you see that as, just as travel agents that specialized in touring orchestras suddenly became an industry? Do
Right.
you foresee this other kind of, public health style, a medical, there's instrument insurance, there's
Right.
touring orchestras. Is there going to be sort of a medical industry in providing, providing Moderna, Pfizer, and especially Johnson & Johnson, because that's
I think that that's a possibility. I mean, I think the thing is, the idea of agency booking, that model is a very it's a very American model, right? Like, as Cathy, like working with China, Cuba, and other these international, non-Western countries, like the idea of like a pure agency that model doesn't quite exist outside of North America and some of the major European countries. So, I think in that sense, I think the other countries would probably provide that more as like, they'll think of that as a service. Maybe that's, again, like part of this whole new normal. Like, that's something that we all have to think about, and that could be something that's going to start popping up as a need and a necessity. Whereas, like, I think, I've been speaking to so many of these agency colleagues back in the United States, and they're just still just trying to move forward. And all they're thinking is, how do I reschedule all the dates that the roster of 20 artists got canceled? Like, that's their focus right now.
And I would like to hear Joe quickly, but I have a challenging question. I totally understand what you say, and I agree. Because we have a different, an additional discussion in Europe when it comes to the vaccination and who is vaccinated and who's not, and do we force people to do so? But how is it like in Malaysia? Because I think your situation is, you said before that how many people are already vaccinated in Malaysia?
I think we've got 80% that's single vaccinated, and I think over 60 or double. But like Cathy, I think we all just have to play all the roles of finding the solution if we wanted to bring a show. I mean, if I wanted to bring somebody from anywhere next year, I'd find a solution with the agent or the producer and say, look, this is our joint responsibility. I want your show. I'll do my side and get the paperwork or the government. I mean, it's how much I want the show. And I was actually reaching out to somebody from Lithuania for a project for this year, just because I'm crazy and I think it will work, But it is actually both responsibilities on both sides, that if I wanted, or if you want to sell the show, you help me from your side, and at my side, I will look at how I need to find a way. But I certainly won't go into the business of medical insurance or whatever, but I'd find the solutions, But Malaysia, at the moment, we don't have any foreign shows. No one's coming in. No one's even going out for performances, And I think the risk of producers taking on when the government says suddenly no shows, and you can't have an insurance. We don't have the Western standards of insuring an event. I don't think any of the Malaysian events have ever been insured that way. We got the public liability thing, but not in case an event is cancelled,
So are people, how are audiences reacting, domestic audiences for domestic performances? Are people coming out to attend performances?
I think even if I had a show in April, which we were limited to maximum 150 people. It was a classical concert, and we had 150 people that bought tickets. So I think like anywhere, even like the Australian example, people will want to come out and want to support, but there's also the public who's a bit nervous being inside the theatre. It is easier to sell things that are not in a space or a cooped up room. So I think theatre performances in closed, restricted areas, people are still nervous about it, because you are hearing stories. But recently they opened the doors to an island, a holiday resort. Suddenly today the news is 50 staff from that hotel has got COVID. So then the repercussion of that will kill the whole industry, So this is what's going to happen that's why I was very pleased with the Olympics, that there was no negative repercussions, no negative news of it having spread virus, and nobody mentioned about anyone catching the virus while they were there.
Right.
They were detected even before going there. So that's a bit of good news from Japan,
So maybe we need to learn from Japan. Go ahead, Yana.
Yeah, I have a question, because I think my personal opinion is that we need the vaccination if it comes to theaters domestically, if it comes to traveling, touring, anything. I think there is no chance to go back to not new, like whatever kind of performing arts scene, as it were, without a vaccination. At the same time, we have a huge discussion here in Germany where people say, we go like, we have 3G. You either need to be vaccinated, recovered, or you need to have a positive test. No, a negative test, of course. So, but now Hamburg, for example, a lot of locations started to go on 2G, where they say you need to be vaccinated or recovered. So the only testing doesn't work anymore. You need to have. And this started this huge discussion here where they say, you exclude people. We exclude people from bars, from restaurants, from theaters, because we exclude people who decide not to get vaccinated or who cannot get vaccinated. I mean, that's another group of people, because I know someone I know a few actually who have like an autoimmune sickness who cannot get any kind of vaccination. So yeah, of course, we would exclude these people from audience, but at the same time, just, I just want to hear your opinion on what, if I have an artist who says, but I don't want a vaccination, I decide not to.
I think because of the nature of the disease, it's a public health issue. And I think there should be no exceptions. It's just that, we don't allow children to enroll in school unless they've had polio, their Tdap, et cetera. It's a public health issue. I mean, one piece of history that the pundits have been pointing to those anti-vaxxers in the United States is that part of the reason that the American Revolution was finally won was that George Washington, the father of our country, the General George Washington, the head of our armed forces, realized that his troops were at risk for smallpox. And in Boston, he had his troops, he had the US Continental Army vaccinated against smallpox. He just said, do it. This is what's going to have to happen, because otherwise we're going to have no army left. And so it's the same thing. It's an existential threat. So it's just like the other required vaccinations.
But how do you enforce that? I have a factory of 23 workers. Everybody wants to be vaccinated, and almost all has had double, except one staff who says that I got a medical condition and I could not force him, and I didn't want to force him because he says he has a medical condition, and it is a health risk because he can bring it to the factory, or he is not able to service the customs or go to government agencies, because you can't go into a public building now if you don't have a double vaccine, So it is a problem.
Right, but so for example, United Airlines just recently the CEO of United Airlines just said, do it. There's going to be no exceptions. You do it. You don't want to do it. God bless you. We'll give you your severance pay. Find a job somewhere else. So my my daughter is expecting her first child in December, and her in-laws are anti-vaxxers. And so it was going to be very, very difficult because she's a lawyer. She's adamant. It was like, no, you're just not going to see your grandchild. You're going to visit me or anything until that changes. But workplace mandates. There were, where these two people worked, there were finally mandates that they had to get vaccinated, and they could not afford to lose those jobs. And so they held their noses. They got vaccinated. I have other, shirt tail kin, as we call them, where they're just kind of off the deep end and they have not vaccinated their kids and for anything, even before any of this, and they homeschool their children. But we have that lunatic fringe in the United States, unfortunately, and that's, we had one of the, you've seen that flag, "Don't tread on me," which used to be the American Revolution flag, and now it's used by the anti-vaxxers. "Don't tread on me," don't you dare make me.
I can't understand the psyche of Americans. We laugh here because here we just toe the line and we know it's for our own safety.
Here we cry.
So everybody wants.
We cry in despair. That's a whole other conversation, but it's But
in Malaysia, you're right. It's about the government taking stronger mandate position of saying, look, we're going to mandate it that you can't go into these places, or you can't have. So you have the right to refuse entry for somebody who's not been vaccinated.
Right. And so the things I said that's happening within the cities and with the states. For example, California, who just, their governor just survived very handily a recall election.
I know.
And next year, I think as early as next year, there are going to be vaccinations for school children before they go to school. It's great. It's great. They're really, really proactive about it.
But the thing is, going back to your very first question, is it's not only about vaccinating or vaccination, but it's about the right vaccination. And that just adds something to the problem. Because like for me, for example, I have AstraZeneca first and BioNTech Pfizer second. So I have, in Germany, we call this the cross vaccination. Right. And I know that there are countries who say, oh no, she can't get in because I'm not considered fully vaccinated. Right. It changed now because it's but I was like, oh, well, this is interesting. So I have 2 shots. Mm-hmm. I'm healthy and I still can't travel to certain countries. I don't want to go there. It's fine, but that adds a challenge because if you live in Cuba, as you said earlier, and that's the vaccination you get. So what do you do?
What they're trying to do is find some way to get 20 doses of Johnson & Johnson, which is it's a single.
That just adds another task to the production manager list.
Right. And gets get them to Mexico. Probably they'll go to Mexico. Is going to be the easiest to get.
That's extra travel, extra costs, extra. It's something that we all have to keep in mind. The same, like, okay, where do you go? What's the quickest way back home? Do you keep that in mind while booking your, the flights? Don't take the cheapest one, which is not refundable, for example.
Right. The also is, I don't know what insurance companies are doing in terms of, force we all signed those force majeure clauses, and we all laughed when we saw the language about pandemic, and here we are.
No, but you see pictures of China, millions of people mingling out there with masks, and with their Sinovac vaccines, and yet will the Western world stop the tourists from coming in if they're from China, knowing that it is income next year? What's going to happen to the tourism industry?
Well, in the United States, there are many other fraught issues with China at the moment. So I don't know whether some of that will play into it.
I think not the States. I think the States is never dependent on Chinese tourists because of the China-America thing. No, but certainly in Europe.
Not tourists, but interestingly enough, a very large percentage of the foreign full fee paying, full tuition paying students at universities have been Chinese.
True.
And also investments, and also physical land, real estate investments are a lot from China too.
Right. So certainly we're already seeing a change because of what's been going on in China for the last 2 years and what's going on now with Evergrande, et cetera. You're seeing that most of the American funds are not investing in Chinese companies. There's just, I think they're also waiting if, God willing, the Congress and Senate pass the infrastructure bill, that there are going to be plenty of opportunities for more, investments, domestic investments in rebuilding here in the States. But, it remains to be seen. I mean, the business community is divided. There are people who, have not given up on engagement with China. And then there are others who do think, that we have to be more inward looking also. So there's the jury's still out on that.
Right.
Again, it's a complex issue.
It is. And I mean, this actually, we keep thinking about, like, there's all of these logistical new normal that we all have to deal with. And at some point, and I think because the science is still trying to catch up. And so before science can catch up, the policies are very transient. They're going to constantly change, for sure, for like the next 2, 3, even 5 years, right? Before the science can fully say, okay, we know now that we just have to get this shot every single year and we're going to be fine, just like the flu shot. And I'm thinking that's where we're going to be at. But before that, I think all of this is going to be very messy. So I'm already thinking, like, 3-5 years down the road, like, once we now have established that, we talk about the new normal, but are we really creating the new normal, or do we think like bad habits are going to kick in and then
you're just creating a new normal, which includes the bad habits,
which include, just like I think it's like the travel industry, right? With 9/11, everything got also, in a way, got stopped, and that changed, but then past a certain period of time, everyone kind of just had like, amnesia and forgot all about it.
Right.
And that's sort of, I guess, I think that's sort of like what I'm thinking now is like, because, like you said, Broadway is back, the Metropolitan Opera House opened finally, after like 18 months of being shut down. And even like over the summer, people are going back to performances. And then like in August, there was like this whole, New York concert at Central Park, and you see all these people, like there was like 10,000 people at Central Park, even though it was outdoors. There was no social distancing whatsoever. The only difference is that people were wearing masks, right? So that behavior, I guess that I'm just curious, like, what are the people's behavior like now?
I think that's going to depend on the course of the pandemic. We're not going to know what the new normal is until we know the public health situation, because if it comes roaring back again with a breakthrough with the Delta, et cetera, we're going to go back into, those states who want to protect their populations will go back into lockdown. Those who don't, like in the South, they'll continue to, what we call it, the Darwin Awards. The Darwin Awards, it's the people who will, the people will die because of their own idiocy, so their dumb genes will be passed on. It's the Darwin Award. I mean, there's even, I won't go into the politics, the insanity about, they want the pandemic, the pandemic is now they're gonna say it's, they're happy to have the pandemic because it's going to eliminate Republican voters because they're going to die because they're not going to take the vaccine. It's craziness.
Oh, God.
So there's the new normal that way. There's the new normal of what people will be interested in seeing after. It's kind of, you have to look at what happened to the arts after the plague in medieval Europe. Do you get the Decameron, or do you get bread and circuses? What do people really want to do? So I want to quote that. So I was in a meeting, I'm on the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, and we are talking about all these, fraught relationships and what's happening going forward. And someone had a very good point, and they said that, we need to be aware of the fault lines in the politics, in the ethics of engagement, such as, Tiananmen, trade, regional securitization, escalating supervision, all of that, especially in China, and that we should not expect to be able to change things, but we just have an obligation to make sure that the issues are known. So that's another whole thing, what is the appetite for engagement in places where there are, fraught situations? I mean, yes, you've got Xinjiang, you've got also what's going on in Cuba. I don't know if you've been following it, but as of almost a year ago, the cultural community especially has been rising up and demanding better and different of its government. And as of this July, that spread to the population as a whole, where because of COVID, yes, the embargo for 60 years, et cetera, but because of COVID, they lost their current source of any hard currency. And they had a botched attempt at currency reform. And as a result, there are shortages in food, medicine. They can't even get aspirin. And so people are dying left and right because of this. And one of the cities just, they said, in one of the cities near Havana, people just took to the streets. And because there's internet now, the rest of the country saw this and they took to the streets as well. And so this was a huge shock to, even more of a shock than last November to the government that struck back. But there's organizing going on now, and the leaders of this movement are the cultural workers, the theater workers, et cetera. Right now, they're trying to be sensitive to the pandemic situation. So they're waiting until the international borders of Cuba open up again mid-November, and then on November 20th, there's a general action, a march call for the country from all those who want the government to reform itself. And so at that point, do you go to Cuba? Do you not go to Cuba? Do you engage their musicians or their performers? Do you only engage the ones that are independent? Are you in this United States, are you going to be able to get a visa for them? Yeah. Because during the Trump administration, they wouldn't even give interviews to people who were Cuban. And can they come because of the vaccine situation? So it's very complex.
But I think it's interesting also, I mean, it's very complex, as you said, but isn't it true, kind of, that as long as people are in the need of change, they change something?
Well, that's certainly...
Well, not Cuba, but
I've got to plug in, so I'm moving.
Okay. Not when it comes to Cuba, but also referring to Cindy's question, social distancing, no social distancing. I feel like as long as it's in your, it's very present, the pandemic is present, everyone will take, care of themselves, of their relatives, of everyone around them, to not get sick, to not get, But I think the moment the pandemic kind of gets a little bit in the back, life is going back to more normal, everything's a bit more normal. People tend to, it's like when you're sick, you really take care of yourself. You drink healthy, you eat healthy, you take everything. So the moment you feel better, you leave your scarf at home, you drink, you drink a wine once in a while, and this becomes more and more and more the longer the sickness is over. So I'm just thinking, I think it's also human to not get, to change something as long as you have to change something, and then keep what you like, just to say that very, to use a very light term. But what is uncomfortable, you just go back to normal, because it's not comfortable until there's a new need to change something.
But don't you think on a personal level, I personally have changed a lot, because the whole 1.5 years have made me rethink, rework, and really want to change, because I want a new normal for myself, where I want to change my way of thinking and using technology and adapting and I want to be a better producer because of what's happened, so that I'm prepared. If anything goes wrong next time, I'm equipped. I think that the clever ones, the good ones, realize that there is going to be a different normal, right? You're better equipped. You shouldn't go back to who you were if you were not the best, you know?
And for me, my personal, my life, I just had a long talk about it yesterday, changed a lot, I have to say anyway. But a friend of mine said something, and that's why I was saying this. And she said to me, you know what? Something really awkward is happening. It is, and I never thought this could happen, but things are going back to normal as they were. Not not for everyone and not in general, but she was completely like, oh my God, I never thought this could be possible, but I see things going back to normal. And I never, like she said to me, she was sitting here and she said, I never thought that could be. I thought this really changes something. And it does, but not as big as I thought.
You know, for some people, psychologically, I've changed. I've looked at food, I've looked at issues, I looked at meaning, apart from the arts and creativity, you know. I think it has changed some people. Yes, of course, outwardly, everybody wants that normal thing. But I think I'm a better equipped person for any catastrophe from now on, you know, because I've learned for 1.5 years the issues that I had to face, you know. And like I said, I'm a pathological optimist. I'm old school. I can't have AI, AR, VI type shows or whatever, because I want real tactile thing, touching. So, but I do want to change. I want to use technology that I've seen working in this last 1.5 years to benefit my work. So I feel as if the new normal is a good new normal for me, because I want to adapt.
My neighbor, she has a daughter and she's 4 and she loves New York City Ballet. She could never go because, you know, they cannot afford to go to New York and pay even the flight. But now she can watch New York City Ballet, and not just one video, but she can, you know, she can attend classes, she can do all that stuff. This is something that came out of the pandemic, which is absolutely fantastic.
And I think a lot of that is going to continue, because I think
I agree.
I think that they will, I think even though they will try their best to monetize what of that they can, that they realize that access is so important. Also, there has been a sea change in some respect in the United States because of the aftermath of the George Floyd murder and the Black Lives Matter. That's really, you know, yes, we still have our, you know, the horrible racism situation in the US. It's a little, you know, it's still more regional, you know, it's still, you know, in the South did win the Civil War in many, you know, in some respects culturally, you know, it did, that's another issue that, you know, the South should have been should have been occupied territory for 5 generations to root out racism, is what should have happened, but it didn't. But anyhow, there is among at least the major institutions nationally a real reckoning with engagement, you know, with, you know, diversity and inclusion, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so everyone is racing to add people to the staff to deal with that, but to deal with that in a very real way. I mean, for the first time ever last week, that Black living composers' work was presented at the Metropolitan Opera.
I saw that, yeah.
Opening night, first time ever, opening night or not, and a huge success, and a huge, you know, sort of the organization really had to reckon with its past. You're seeing, you know, on the airwaves, the Black classical composers that were ignored or fetishized for many years are now getting played all the time, not just during Black History Month. So that, you know, there's going to be more Black theater on Broadway than ever before. So we are seeing changes in that way that don't really have, you know, not as a result of the pandemic, but as a result of the other reckoning that's going on here in the United States.
Maybe it's a kind of a result, because I feel like people got a bit more, well, some people just have a new connection towards their sensitivity. because this whole, getting shaken up, nothing is like you thought. Everything, like what you said earlier, Cathy, like the ground we were all standing on just literally got shaken, and it did something to people. So I feel like sometimes when I look even at my group of people I see every day, some of them are more close to their, I don't know, feelings, or they're more sensitive. It made them more aware of things. It made them more, I don't even know if it's, being stuck at home and not being distracted all the time.
I think it's the, with the US, it was because of technology, and it was because of people, sort of citizen involvement in, citizen activism, just giving testimony, as it was. And so while this was going on, there was a teenager who thought to turn her cell phone camera on. And it was only because this was, you could not look away and pretend this was not happening, because it was, because it was documented. Now you'll always have the crazies who say it was fake, but those are the same crazies that, what's happening in the United States is in these anti-vaxxer, heavy regions where the people have really been brainwashed. People are still in denial as they're dying. They'll say, they'll say, I can't believe this is happening to me in their last breaths, or they'll say, this isn't COVID, this is cancer, because they just can't, they just can't bring themselves to admit that this is what it is. But that seems to be, so it's interesting, during history, especially US history, during periods of deep technological change, there was this tendency for these extreme religions to take root. And you'd have what's called the burned over area, where the revivals, religious revivals will come through. And for example, the Mormon religion was a reaction to some of this, kind of post-industrial revolution. And so this, these cultish, cultures that were seeing the anti-vax, the sort of homeschooling, the survivalists, etc. In some part, I think, is kind of reaction to the technological revolution that we've had with internet and AI and VR and the rest of that, where we're going into a post-industrial society, and the population that was formerly employed in assembly line jobs, service economy, etc., is not equipped to move on. So they don't know how to make a living, and then they resent, those people who have higher education. They feel condescended to by the so-called coastal elites, and that affects people's, how they live their lives, but also the entertainment they see.
Well, people also, they want answers. I had this discussion a few weeks ago where someone next to me said, COVID is not a virus. And I was like, oh, it's not? So what is it then?
I know.
Or a flower? And this was a woman, and she said, she was laughing. She was like, it has never been isolated. And I was like, oh, and you're a virologist? Where are you? She was a school teacher. I don't know. And I was like, oh my God, this is really, but the thing is, I realized on her, she was really happy, and she was because she had an answer. For her, it worked to say, that is not a virus, so it cannot be dangerous, so it cannot kill people. So my world is fantastic, and I live my happy life ever after. And I thought, oh, that was easy. For me, it's not that easy, because I cannot see it that way. For me, it's more complex, and it's more difficult to deal with the whole situation, as for a lot of people. But if you look at it from her perspective, there's nothing to worry about, really.
So in Europe and the rest of the, in Europe and in Asia, how much have those able to technologically to trace disinformation campaigns? Because in addition to the just political leanings of a certain part of the U.S. population, those more socially conservative, etc., we have been the targets of very, very sophisticated disinformation campaigns from the Russians, really. It is traceable, and so a lot of this, this mass mania of, yes, they're putting the chips in us when we get.
That one. Heard that one a lot.
I'm just wondering, definitely the propaganda has been, these disinformation campaigns have been productive, but I'm wondering what of that you're seeing where you are.
In Malaysia, we have this Muslim fanatics who say, "Oh, God will protect you. You don't have to go for vaccines." So it's been
the fundamentalist Christians as well.
Yeah. So the government's trying a hard time, but if you look at daily on Facebook when people are dying, and it is this religious Muslim groups that are dying, and people are now really being scared of it. So I think it's not propaganda when you see people posting dead relatives. So I think that's actually scared, because we're heavy online users in Malaysia. Everybody's online. Some of our influencers are better than top actors in UK. Everybody goes online, and the information is quite clear that people are dying. People who have not been vaccinated, people who don't mask, So I think that's actually opened a lot of eyes for even the fanatics, that they realize that, oh, you got to take precautions. You're going to endanger your family, Yeah. So in Malaysia, it's good. I feel quite good that it's now taking shape. The country's in a better order, although politically it's still unstable. But at least where COVID is concerned, I think they're slowly beginning to get a hold of it.
So how have your audience's tastes changed over this period?
Like in Malaysia, the audiences, we stopped. There was no shows. There were no audiences. Only recently, about a week ago, they opened up again that you can actually have shows at 50%.
And so what were they watching online though?
Okay, this is the problem about online. Everybody thinks that it's so easy to go online, but you're fighting off New York Ballet and Sadler's Wells, and you want to charge, and your crappy bathroom type singing will not cut out. So I think it's very, very difficult when it's harder online, because you're fighting off global competition. Whereas when you had your own little local audience, it's easy to sell the tickets. Now you try to sell the tickets to an audience where they have this, for the same price of money, they can see global shows, some free. Mm-hmm. So that's the difficult part of going online, where now the audience is also global, right? But you're also competing against global offerings of online shows. But so how good are you?
So it would be interesting though for international audiences. What are they watching? Are they watching New York City Ballet? Are they watching the Berlin Philharmonic? Are they watching song and dance? Dance dramas from China. What is it that people are watching?
This is why I tell the local theater groups. I said you have to build brand loyalty. A good example is Wild Rice Theatre in Singapore. Throughout the COVID, they've managed to sell even online gala at like 10,000 Sing, which is like maybe 7,000 US at a table, or 1,000 Sing a seat. And that's an online show that's really high, but because they have very, very brand loyalists, that they want to see the show, they believe in your show, you've been producing good shows all these years. But if you are an average, ordinary theater group and you put online, and who is going to watch when they have, for the same price of money, they can have access to anything around the world now. Mm-hmm. When previously it wasn't online. Yeah. So it's a bigger competition field now for everyone. Yeah.
So, Cindy,
but I just want to add this. But I think it's positive, because 30 years ago, if you watch football, right, you 30,000 people watch football in a stadium, right? And so that was that. But now it's sophisticated cameras and all that. 300 million people, and that 30,000 people are watching in the stadium. So I think theater, like films, will start to learn to be better equipped at having both live and online audience.
But that really also, it's like, at the beginning of everything, everyone was rushing to get online, right? And then the conversation is, we all know that this online is not going to go away. It'll stay with us. It'll continue to evolve. But as now, 18 months later, theaters are opening up, venues are opening up, live performances are coming back, you also start to see a certain group of artists starting to abandon the online, and that they've just now are so focused on live performances that they've kind of now put the whole online presence in the back burner again. And so like moving forward, like from the artistic side, what is the new normal for them too, right? From the creative stuff. And I think, I agree, Joe, I think it's going to create this even bigger competition. And I feel like it might even create a bigger divide between the more well-funded artist companies versus the companies that are not well-funded. Like you said, the Berlin Phil had already been doing stuff online even pre-pandemic, but these are companies and organizations with big budgets that can put in the production to make these really good quality materials that can be transmitted through these virtual platforms in a way that people want to spend money, right? And then what about artists who don't have that budget? What are they gonna do? And what is
I'm actually seeing more creativity in a way from the independent artists, the very small groups that are trying to figure out how to survive, and in some cases are being able to reach a broader audience than they might have been. So I'll give you an example. There is a sort of a collaborative group of singers and classical instrumentalists in California called Salastina, and it's kind of semi-early music. And they've created sort of these coffee hour concerts, performances that they started, I guess, 5 or 6 o'clock on the West Coast, and then you can watch them from, your time zone. But they have designed them with the fact that they're online, it's online, or it has to be partly virtual reality. They have to just use the technology to be able to do what they can do. And they did this absolutely hilarious COVID version of the Bach coffee cantata. They had the different singers and the players in different places, and it was a coffee, and it was sort of updated. So it was, the father worried about, potential addiction of her daughter and all of that. And it was hilarious performance, and it became kind of a viral thing because it was so, it was so inventive and on point and of the moment, that it was just something that you wanted to watch, again and again, and something that you wanted to spread to your friends so that they could watch it too. And so, these little groups that, ordinarily, if you didn't live in the Bay Area, you'd never have heard of them, suddenly have a following, in New York or Brooklyn or, what have you, wherever they're music lovers that have managed to stumble on it. So.
But that's a good point, yeah.
Because it needs that. I mean, it's either the Berlin Philharmonics or New York City Ballet, like big companies, they have a big group of audience, and of course they would go online and on the platform to watch everything. Or because like back 1.5 years back, and still there's so much online, all of a sudden it went boom. Like every dancer was dancing in their kitchen, in their, every singer was. So you need exactly this, like this great idea, which sticks out of all these like.
Right. Another one, so the woman who is the principal violist of the New York Philharmonic, she learned about TikTok from her daughter. And
I
so
saw that.
she's got this whole channel now, and she does a little bit of Viola Mom, and she does something.
Yeah, she's fantastic. I know her.
And she did this amazing, and this is, had nothing to do with the film. She did this herself using her New York Phil colleagues, but they did Peter and the Wolf in under 1 minute.
Whoa.
You see, that's the positive side of change, where you realize that technology is an assistant, what you can use, So I like that side of it. People are adapting, quirkier, relevant,
Yeah. But I think that's really where it's a particular creative person or creative small collaborative, because they're more nimble than, you know, the New York Philharmonics or the Philadelphia orchestras, what have you. Yes, those organizations can, you know, create outdoor concerts once they're allowed.
Because they have the technique and they have like 15 cameras and, you know, but I have to say what I like, what I think is interesting is the stuff which is not only for the pandemic, but which will last. Yeah. And like we said this, like in 5 years, you would look at the cellist mom, for example, and say, oh, this is a fantastic, or this is a great video. And then you add, oh, and wasn't this actually starting at the pandemic? So the pandemic is not even the important part anymore, but it's what she created. And that was created during a pandemic. Yeah. But it's much more than this. And this is, I think there are some things out there. I also saw a few things where I thought, this is really great, and this would be great without a pandemic. Maybe the pandemic was necessary to start it, but at one point it would just be on its own.
Yeah. There's a very interesting folk instrument in Norway called the nickel harp.
Oh.
But it looks like a violin, you know, a viol, but it's played with keys.
Yeah.
It's like a national instrument of Norway. And somehow we stumbled upon this player, you know, who looks more like a rock star than a player. And he started, you know, he was originally a classical violinist and then fell in love with the nickel harp, and that's what he does now. But he decided to do this project where he took part of the Bach-Goldberg variations, and he would lay down one of the lines and then invite anyone who wanted to lay down the other track, the other line.
Well, that's a great idea.
And so every week there'd be, you know, a different one. And it was absolutely fabulous because it became interactive as well.
Right. So I think this is really, you know, this is like the new normal really is challenging us to be out of our comfort zone. And to not to be harsh about it, but if you can't get with the program, then you're going to be left behind. I think that's what it is. I mean, if you think about the TikTok and all of this kind of stuff, it already pre-existed in pop culture before the pandemic, you know? And so I think I always like to just address our arts world and just tell ourselves, like, tell everyone, like, we just have to get ourselves off our high horses. Like, really, like, it's just, that's what it is. Otherwise, we're just not going to be relevant, because I think new normal means still, how do you continue to stay relevant doing what you do? And there are going to be artists who's going to say, oh, this is too, you know, this is above my pay grade. Like, why would I want to be on TikTok, right? But then you're going to be at risk of being left out, I guess, right? Not to say you need to do what everyone else is doing, but you have to be aware, whether it's large organizations or small organizations or someone who's just coming out. I mean, I think we have to get off our high horses and realize what is our current situation. And that may be also that new normal is like you said, from the creative side, I'm actually very excited. But you also start to see, you know, the artists that may be left out because they're like starting to kind of go back to what Yana says, that old habit, like, oh, the normal of like what we were doing. They were just so anticipating what was pre-pandemic that they want to go back to that, thinking that that's the new normal.
I think there's also, you know, the new normal and old normal and the segmentation of audiences. Yeah. So there's part of the audiences that's only going to want to go to the Metropolitan Opera and see La Boheme. Then there's the audience that is dying to go to Detroit Opera Theater and see the Goethe-Dämmerung that they did in the parking garage next door.
But you know, Cathy, you mentioned Darwin, right? I think what Darwin said about survival, it's not the strongest, but the best at adapting that will survive.
Yeah,
being relevant, changing with the times, you know, even whether without COVID, we need to change already, you know?
Yeah,
we need to be adapting to a new world. Forget about COVID, you know, even without COVID, we need to stay relevant in the arts, you know, getting new audiences.
Sure.
We were all thinking about that even before COVID. How do you bring in new audiences? Yeah.
Exactly. So that leads me to this segment that I was telling Yana I wanted to start talking about, is this little idea of underrated or overrated. and we're talking about change. And I want to get everyone's opinion about program notes, right? Everywhere you go, the traditional theater, you get handed a program notes. And this got me thinking. This is like, and then you have people that are just, you know, who train to write program notes, right? Like they are putting programs together, the marketing departments, like I need the description. When people come into the theater, I have a description of what the program is for tonight. And every artist, especially if you're classical musicians, are asked to hand them over the programs. And it made me think about like going to the restaurants, you know, and you get a menu. But now you can't get a menu because of COVID. A lot of restaurants around the world are asking you to scan QR codes.
Right.
So for me personally, what do you think? Like program notes, overrated or under? I think it's completely overrated. I think we need to get rid of program notes because for me, it's a waste. It's not environmentally friendly, and like by the time the curtains go up, lights go down, you can't read a single damn thing on that program note.
I love program notes, but I think you know, definitely program notes optional. I know there are a lot of orchestras that are going to online program notes. So you get your program notes when you buy your ticket. You know, when you buy your ticket online, you get electronic program notes. And I think program notes, you know, some people, you know, different people want different type of notes. Some people just want the first movement is fast, the second movement is slow, the third movement is fast. And then there's some people who really want to know all about the work and, you know, both musically and sociologically. Some people just want to know about the composer. Oh, he loved to drink beer and play Skittles with his friends, you know, down at the tavern, or, you know, he was an insurance salesman who composed on the side. You know, what's the story? What's going to get people interested in, you know, or why do people like this piece? You know, what was different about it? And I think, again, it's a segmented audience and they're going to have very, very different needs. I think it's a missed opportunity if you don't offer them. I think certainly there are greener ways to do it, and I think they can all be done electronically.
Yeah, I think I'm for program notes because I love reading when I go home.
Yes.
And then what did I see? I don't read before the show. I read after the show, you know. And then and I'm an old man and I love program notes and I love to keep them as mementos because I remember times. But you know, everywhere you go now, everything is scanned, it goes in, it's paperless, it's green. There is the need to change also of how we handle paper, you know, the need to have papers all over the place. But I kind of like that old memento. I keep stubs and all that. I'm like a squirrel. I keep all little status stubs and all because I love them. And then a few years ago, I threw everything away because I was going to be Buddhist and start everything new. and it worked, you know, you get rid of everything and new things come in. It's like weed thy garden, you know. So, you know, but I love picking up things and keeping, and then after a few years, I'll get rid of everything.
I think I'm somewhere in between. I was at the ballet for the first time in 1.5 years, last Friday, and I bought program notes for me, and then my mom took them home. I don't know, it just happened. And then she sent an email to all her friends, including me, and she said, oh, you have to read the notes before you go to watch the ballet because it tells you everything about the ballet. And I was like, oh, because then I read it and I thought it was really, really good. I loved not have reading it before because I like the view on the ballet without knowing anything. I like what I learned about and then I called her and it was a ballet of a very close friend of mine. And I said to my mom, oh, you know, that one point, the one thing he said in the interview, I can add something. And then she started laughing and she said, oh, this should have been in the program notes. And I was like, oh yeah, it's true. Maybe, you know, you add something personal, but this is, so I'm thinking I personally could not have them, but at the same time, reading them afterwards, I was like, oh, it's quite good. But I agree, it should be digital, it should not be on paper, and it should be optional. So I think that would be my...
I only read it after the show.
I think even the program note itself, right? I think there's certain program notes that are starting to, you know, you'll see like a certain format. And to me, I think that's what bugs me. Maybe that's what it needs to do, is like that needs to just change the format of how the program notes are written, because certain like very traditional Western disciplines of program notes are written just in the same way, or like the Broadway playbill, right? It's just the same format, and maybe that's just what I want to see, is like something a little bit different,
Right.
I mean,
so the Philadelphia Orchestra got funding a number of years ago to try to develop these program notes that would be delivered electronically, that were even almost like a baseball or soccer play-by-play.
Yeah.
So to make it,
that's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah.
I'm here with this thing, so listen for this, and so I'm not quite sure how that would kind of be maybe distracting, but that that's another way of engaging,
right?
To tell people what to listen for. Also, I mean, so the Opera Company of Philadelphia had a really brilliant education director for a long time, and what they realized they could do was open up all of their dress rehearsals to the public school, high school kids in the city of Philadelphia. And so they would develop sort of a turnkey curriculum that could be added onto the normal subjects that were required, in the high school. And so, for example, when they took the kids in to see Tosca, they had already, studied different aspects of it, whether it was using math to, how you need math to fit the sets to the theater, or the historical context, European history and what was going on, or health, health class, like, sexual obsession, Tosca, my body, myself. And so as a result, when these kids came in, they were like totally wired. They were totally engaged in what was going on, on stage, in a really visceral way. Yeah. The New Victory Theater, the Children's Theater and Family Theater in New York City, has also been very successful, where they'll get the curriculum, information on the curriculum requirements for the state of New York from schools, and they're able to do their programming in a way that speaks to these curricula, so that schools can get funding to take their kids to these programs. So it's kind of figuring out how you're going to source support and audience from different segments.
Right, cool. Excellent. Well, I so appreciate both of your time today. It was so enlightening and so really like stimulating, educational, all at the same time. Really, again, like for me, I always take something back. I always feel like there's something I can walk away with and just say, hey, I didn't think of that before. Final round, borders are still fairly closed, but we always like to ask our guests, if you could get on a plane, where would you want to go next?
Well, New York for me.
For business it would be one. For pleasure, it would be the other.
Where would you business pleasure?
Well, for business it would be both China. It would be both Shanghai and Havana. I miss both places, deeply, and my colleagues there deeply. Though, thank God, thanks to the internet, we're in close contact in both places. For pleasure, it would be Italy.
Oh, nice.
Oh,
nice. Excellent. Well, for me, I'm actually getting on a plane this Thursday, and I'm going to France. And that's also not easy, trying to figure out how to come back either, like planning it, like what Yana pointed out earlier, but certainly I think business, definitely, I think I do miss Shanghai, and that would be, I'm so eager to go back to Shanghai. So that's me. But New York has been a very popular destination for all of our speakers.
Yeah, absolutely. Since I booked my flight already to New York for January, I would say now Shanghai as well, because I don't know, yesterday I canceled my hotel room for the Shanghai Arts Festival because it was still on booking.com. I was like, oh shit, I have to cancel. And I thought, I wish I could
sing it another year.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I await I await seeing all of you in New York in January.
For sure.
Oh,
For sure.
absolutely.
For
Next year.
sure.
So be
Yes. Well, thank you.
Let's make a pact. See you in January.
I know. Let's all meet in January. And thank you to all our audiences today for tuning in. We're so, thank you again for your continued support. Please, subscribe, like, and comment below. All our guest info are down below if you want to learn more about them and their organizations. So we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.